Aras gwni cwr an gédal sias ys mín le marog or gwyln si os ar ymhyn yn fyddan ceir saifin fe'n siafel at alcohorethe gwyl sians an cos le na herinig horlar na herinig in Malta agus Nuair a bhíon muid caint tá sé iontach an cuian an ceangal sin ar éire agus Malta dainethe le úr obairthéan daoine seán in suas le céad, daoine éile beidir tar réit carna blianta eileach na mara súile agus a go háirithe gan buchas mar uachtarán na hhéir an líad san a bhí gabar chun ahantas éarnach cuineáil in Ilion Malta. May I just say, Minister and distinguished guests, what a great pleasure it is for Sabina and I to be here this afternoon on a visit, the state visit to Malta at the invitation of President George Valletta. I'm accompanied as the representative of the Irish government by the Minister for Social Protection and for Rural and Community Development Minister Heather Humphreys. I'm also there's a number of the Secretary General of the Department of Foreign Affairs is here, and a number of people who have been working for Ireland. It was a very, very great pleasure, as I have just said in Irish, that so many of you have retained your very strong identity with Ireland and have worked for Ireland in different ways in keeping the spirit of Ireland abroad and alive abroad and flourishing it. And also, as well as that, I think some people with, as I said in Irish, like Kate Corristachaka, nearly half a century in Malta, and others of different decades who have in different ways been making their lives, and how lucky they are. Now, our visit was to have taken place, I think, the end of last year, but due to COVID, this had to be postponed until we are now. It has been an excellent visit, I have to say. President Valletta and I are members of a group called Olas, which is a group of 15 non-executive presidents. We meet regularly to discuss matters. And the President and I have been, we met last in Rome, and I have to say, every time we meet, we are both struck by not only how much we share in terms of an experience of Ireland, but also how much we share by way of current perspectives. I do think Ambassador has mentioned we're all very conscious, and we have to be conscious of the terrible darkness that is cast upon all of our lives by what is taking place in Ukraine. The loss of life, the loss of homes, the loss of communities as a result of what is an invasion that is in breach of international law and covenants and indeed morality itself. I think that is why, in the course of our talks this week, President Valletta and I have said there are many diplomats present here. This is one of the greatest tests of diplomacy that we cannot afford to lose, and that is to bring to an end this loss of life, establish a ceasefire, viable and accessible humanitarian corridors, and as well as that, set, if you like, try and envisage a future in which we will be able to achieve security. I also think, as well as that, as we discussed all of these issues, President Valletta and I will have an opportunity of discussing these again when I return here for a meeting of our IOLUS group in October. But my main thing, as I was speaking about our visit, our state visit having to be postponed due to COVID, I'm aware that for many of you from Ireland, it was a very distressing time, the experience of COVID. People who could not make contact with their relatives, people who had made arrangements to resume connections with my aunt in Ireland, people indeed who had relatives who were vulnerable and so on. But I think that we're at least at this point where we can do all those things which are in fact very Irish, which is reaching out to each other and caring for each other. I think it's very, as well as that, I was introduced with my background in inter alia of other matters in relation to culture. I do want to say it's wonderful to see the harp here, and I want to thank Jacob Pertelli, and indeed want to thank Jimmy Tyrrell for his two songs. I think it's very interesting. I think that Pete St. John, who sadly passed away just as before the end of COVID, would have been very pleased to have heard his song here. And of course, Pete St. John, we should remind ourselves as well. He came to see me in Oris and Uachtaráin to give me news of the new recording he had, No Time to Waste, which was of course about climate change. He was a wonderful man. I think as well, one of the points that we've been discussing during my time in Malta is our shared maritime tradition. I think in relation to the other song, Brendan Behan in fact had a maritime experience travelling between Galway and the Aran Islands, which is well recorded. But one of the things that people don't, I think, pay sufficient recognition to was Brendan Behan's knowledge of the Irish language and his poems in Irish, some of which were translated by Ulick O'Connor later. But it's interesting too that is something Ireland and Malta have in common. When we opened our speeches at the official dinner the other evening, the President Valletta spoke in Maltese and was very pleased that I was able to speak in Irish. The protection of one's heritage, and including the importance of language itself, is something that was very, very important. We share so much. We share a struggle for independence. And it's very interesting that there are very significant moments in Maltese history and Irish history which almost occur at the same time. The Irish Constitution of 1922, the Irish Maltese Constitution 1921. But also, I was very pleased, if I say personally, since I was a very child attending school, I have to say, and I hope you understand it, I'm so delighted that Jana Mentoff is here, because I followed in my early days reading about politics. And I was in my uncle's house. They were very interested in politics, and the one thing they had, whatever the circumstances, was the daily paper. And I remember I know quite a bit about that famous collision that took place in relation to matters of church and state and all the rest of it. And I do think that it was a great pleasure to be able to visit the statue today. It is a great pleasure to have met Jana this evening, and I thank her as well for attending my talk this morning on migration. I think we're blown away, really. It's my first time, Spinners and mine, in Malta. My native time we would have planned it. But to think of Malta, in many cases, with its 3 UNESCO recognized sites that are in the World Register, when one looks, one can hardly actually move your gaze, because there's any square foot of it really is in fact full of archaeological significance and historical significance. As we move into the contemporary, through the more recent history, there are many things we have done together. Again, in relation to our talks during the last few days, President Valletta and I have been discussing about the importance of describing our position internationally in relation to neutrality as positive neutrality. We just don't use those words, but we use it in this, we give meaning to it, because there is no day since we joined the United Nations that we haven't had Irish forces serving abroad in peacekeeping missions. And when the issue comes up at the United Nations, the country that is most acceptable to countries in different continents is Ireland. And side by side with those forces, for example, our Maltese soldiers, for example, serving in our mission in the Lebanon. And these are very important. This is why we speak positively about using our neutrality. I think it is very significant too that it was during the Irish presidency of the European Union in 2004 that Malta joined the European Union. And both of us have benefited from our membership of the Union. But we have something else as well. Here we are, and 2 points with the European Union between us. We're at peripheral points, if you like. And I think what is very important in the discussions that we had again, both of us were thinking about in the discussions on what kind of Europe do we want to have in the future. It is not a Europe, as I've said earlier today in one of my speeches, a Europe that is, if you like, the principal purchasing ground for the armaments industry of the world. It is a Europe at peace, a Europe that is able to celebrate its traditions and heritage, but also offer a decent life to its people of all ages, young people and old ages. This is why I think in many cases countries with population sizes the like of Ireland are continual reminders of the moral purpose and the moral possibilities of the European Union. I'm delighted in that case that, for example, that the Minister is accompanied. The Minister has responsibility for welcoming those who will, in fact, among others, welcome those who are now fleeing and who are arriving in our shores, 24,000 already. And I think as well, that in the darkness of it all, the idea that there are doors being thrown open in Europe to receive those who desperately need assistance, assurance and understanding is in fact a high moral moment. Moving to something less conflictual, for example, I think the final football game between Floriana and Valletta next Sunday. May I say how delighted I am to meet so many Florianites here this evening, and I have to be careful not to be biased. I think as well the Irish connection that is a very important connection. I think going back at least to in the end of the 19th century. There's so many significant, when you read dramatic connections too between Malta and Ireland. There is the Maltese woman Henrietta Chevalier, who worked with the Irish Catholic priest Monsignor Hugh Flaherty, about which a very fine documentary has been made on their work in providing safe houses for World War II and for all the number of people that they saved. I think too, as well as that, I should mention again in a totally unbiased way that Dr. Michael Dundon, who really from Patrickswell, who was leader of the Maltese Labour Party and had a portfolio on health. But there's so many. What I think is exciting too is that when reminding me, I was had my speech today at an event which was co-sponsored by the University of Malta. How good it is that our young people are exchanging each other. Again, responding to something different to this darkness where we are now. What a good idea Erasmus was. Young people crossing borders in each other's countries and benefiting from it. A few years ago, I was asked to speak about Erasmus. And there are actually 1 million babies who were born to Erasmus students who had come together during the experience. This is a Europe full of hope and life and joy. There are at the moment connections between Maltese universities in 12 different connections that we have, but an opportunity so very, very much more. And these are all deep, rich connections upon which we can build. I do want to say as well how, as somebody who had a certain connection with the Irish film industry in many cases, how good it is that the Irish Film Institute, of which I'm patron, is participating, and that you will be able to see Irish film. Irish film is simply taken off internationally, and I think it's very, very good to that the Victoria International Arts Festival in June as well will be celebrating Bloomsday. I think as in the year in which we're celebrating the publication of Ulysses, one has to think in many cases of James Joyce in all the places in Europe in which he drank a glass of wine and was preparing a book that would literally change literature. My wish about that is that people would say Joyce said that he wrote the book for it to be read, and he also wanted to emphasize the humor in it. I think it's interesting, isn't it, really, as ourselves, as well, that all of those people who are some of the most creative that we've had in our history found it necessary to have the experience of movement and often of the exilic. They had a good look at their country from a certain distance. And I think, therefore, as you look to Ireland from your distance and whatever, I thank you for your continuous connection with it, and also, if you like, for your view of it, and also for your wonderful ability to be able the contribution so many of you are doing to Malta, and how you're able to do that without the slightest contradiction of the feelings that you have for Ireland. And I want to assure you, as President of Ireland, that both Spain and I, when we travel abroad and meet members of the Irish community abroad, we see all of these as an Irish family that does what Irish family does great, a certain kind of scattering in different, whether it is at home abroad. Gwimar agus Spannach darid and Gokra the Thaw Shulage Niwan and Nale de Jacques on Taki. I want to thank the Ambassador, and I want to thank his staff and those in the Department of Foreign Affairs who have been involved in organising what has been a most successful state visit on behalf of Ireland to Malta. So, Verbanach don Taki Mille Buikas, as Bunchana of us and Medelia, then Okoy John. Got a meal of Thank you.